Welcome to another episode of Inflection. I am Brian Berletic. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. Hello, Angelo. How are you?
Hi, Brian. Doing great.
Okay, we have a big show today. We're going to go over some, I think, pretty significant news items, but we're going to be talking about the Tiananmen Square incident from 1989. I'm calling it an incident because, as we're going to see, the term massacre really doesn't apply, and we'll get into all of that. And if you're skeptical, I think we've made a convincing argument otherwise. Let's take a look. Tiananmen Square, 1989. This is from The Telegraph. WikiLeaks, no bloodshed inside Tiananmen Square, cables claim. What cables? Cables from the U.S. State Department. And actually, we're gonna go over a lot of documentation where it's the U.S. government itself, the same government that lies about this every single year, admitting that there was no bloodshed and that, well, there's no bloodshed in the square, and that the actual bloodshed that did take place was a two-way street. The protesters were murdering soldiers. They were torching their vehicles. There are picture after picture of the protesters torching military vehicles. That the army came there to slaughter people. Why did they let entire columns of their armored vehicles get torched by the protesters? There were soldiers. These are images that are too grisly to show, but soldiers murdered, lynched, burned to death. Angelo, about 1989, Tiananmen Square. I mean, what did you used to believe about that? And how do you see it now? And what changed your mind about it?
Well, like everyone, there was so much fake news. They were talking about 10,000 protesters being killed. It was like there's a bad guy in front of them, and you just realize if you dig a little bit, and actually thanks to WikiLeaks. Well, think about it. If because there are those leaks, then the Daily Telegraph has no choice but to report this, and it's exposing actually all these Western media that don't do their job. They do just one article, they just throw you a bone for to give you a feeling that they're doing their job. But then after that, you are going to have the next time they are going to report about Tiananmen Square, it's going to be again lies. So here what happens is that what did we learn from those WikiLeaks cables is that there was no one died on the Tiananmen Square, that actually the military were unarmed, while the protesters, they were throwing like petrol bombs. So we had many militaries that actually died, they burned alive. I mean, it's just terrorists. They even hanged. There are some pictures you cannot show here because it's going to be a problem with YouTube. But they would burn them alive and actually hang them on the bridge. And here what you had was what happens that it was at the beginning was a student protest. It was hijacked by thugs. I mean, thugs. In every single country and cities, you have thugs that take over and they become extremely violent. And then we are going to touch this. There's the meddling. Because this is what happened. Very often it's about hijacking movements. China had its own problems, corruptions and so on. I mean, China was going through a huge transition from a civil war to the Great Leap Forward to the Cultural Revolution, and they wanted reforms. It was a sensitive moment. 1979, Deng Xiaoping decided to do the opening up policy. Opening up policy. They also wanted to do some reforms, internal reforms. The Communist Party in China has been reforming forever. Even now, it's a system that even though there's always one party, but there's constant reforms. It's about self-reflection. It self-reflect. It goes what the population wants. It's sensing, what do they want, and that's what makes it very legitimate, because it's very close to the people. So now you got this story about Tiananmen Square. It's completely the opposite. You had the police that was unarmed. They didn't have helmets, and they were killed. It was just And the amount, again, we're talking about the estimate is closer to 300 people died. 300 people died. If you compare, it's the same amount of people that died in South Africa a month ago during the riots. I mean, for a country of 1.4 billion people, it's something. Well, it's a sad thing, but it happened, and we need to look at where China is right now. They took the right decisions, and people are just happy with the outcome. In 1989, look at what happened since 1989 till now, and where China is. It's just a bump on the road for what happened in China for China.
Yes. So what I kind of want to do first is do a little bit of what was going on before 1989, long before 1989. And I've showed this before. We've talked about this before, Angelo. The Office of the Historian, this is a .gov website. This is part of the US State Department. This is from 1964, Review of Tibetan Operations. This is what the US was doing inside of China in the 1960s. Actually, before that. And so they're talking about the CIA Tibetan activity consists of political action, propaganda, and paramilitary activity. Paramilitary means they are armed. They are killing people in armed combat. The purpose of the program at this stage is to keep the political concept of autonomous Tibet alive within Tibet and among foreign nations, principally India, and to help build a capability for resistance against possible political developments inside communist China. And they were doing this then, and they were doing it all the way up until 1989, and they've been doing it all the way up. But we just went over 3 examples of how the US is doing this all along China's periphery. There's one more. Again, people should be getting familiar with these documents by now. This is dated 1965, and they're talking about how the February decision to bomb North Vietnam and the July approval of phase 1 deployments make sense only if they're in support of a long-run United States policy to contain communist China. This is in the 1960s. And they talk about the 3 fronts to contain China along. So when you have all of that in mind, and then we look at what happened in 1989, we can make some assumptions, and we could also go through the evidence here of how the US was backing these protesters, just like we catch them doing all the time now, and we expose them doing all the time now. They were doing that in the lead up to the 1989 incident in Tiananmen Square. Now I want to read what the WikiLeaks cables actually said. So, embassy officers encountered a number of incidents in different locations in which crowds harassed military or police personnel, forced their vehicles to turn around, jeered at displays of captured military equipment, or vandalized captured military vehicles. And again, the pictures of the armored personnel carriers and the tanks being torched, sometimes with people inside. There's also a New York Times article witnessing China's 1989 protests 1,000 miles from Tiananmen Square. And they're talking about U.S. Representative Andy Levin of Michigan. And this is an excerpt. Word spread quickly about what happened. Rumor had it that protesters were being held in a particular police station, and a huge crowd massed outside it. The students weren't there after all, but the crowd set fire to the police station. 3 fire trucks arrived, sirens blaring. The first instinct of the crowd was to move aside, but then I could see the crowd change its mind, as in, wait a minute, we set this fire on purpose, so we don't want this fire truck putting it out. The crowd converged on a truck, chased off the firemen, flipped the truck on its side, and set the truck itself on fire. I'm going to go over a couple more of these, but what does this tell us? This tells us that the protesters weren't peacefully sitting in Tiananmen Square, and then the military and the police just came and cracked down on them. They were destroying the surrounding area. They were fighting with police and military. The police and military were, in many cases, withdrawing because they didn't want to confront the protesters violently. Now, Angelo, you showed me a clip of who at the time was a very young, protest leader who has since moved to the United States and become an integral part of the propaganda war against China. Can you tell us a little bit about what she was doing then, what she said, and how it kind of links to what we see in protest movements today, like more recently, like in Hong Kong, Ukraine, the Arab Spring, and now what we see in Thailand, Myanmar, and Malaysia?
Well, it's within the whole playbook of colored revolution. So what you need to do is you need to create martyrs. You need to actually find whoever is willing to collaborate with you. Or I mean, here in this case, it's about betraying your motherland. So they identify young. Usually they are young kids. I mean, the same as Joshua Wong. Back then in 1989, they identified one of them was Chai Ling. Chai Ling is a young girl. She's like 18 years old. And she actually contacts the CNN and she's having this interview. And she says during the interview, she says, we need to have a bloodshed.
I have been feeling very sad recently. The students themselves lack a developed sense of democracy. To be honest, from the day I called for a hunger strike, I knew we would not get any results. Certain people, certain causes are bound to fail. I have been very clear about this all along, but I've made an effort to present a staunch image, to show that we were striving for victory. But deep down, I knew it was all futile. The more involved I got, the sadder I became. I already felt this back in April. All along, I've kept it to myself, because being Chinese, I felt I shouldn't badmouth the Chinese. But I can't help thinking sometimes, and I might as well say it. You, the Chinese, you are not worth my struggle. You are not worth my sacrifice. But then, I can also see that in this movement, there are many people who do have a conscience. There are many decent people among the students, workers, citizens, and intellectuals. The students keep asking, what should we do next? What can we accomplish? I feel so sad. Because how can I tell them that what we are actually hoping for is bloodshed? For the moment when the government has no choice but to brazenly butcher the people. Only when the square is awash with blood will the people of China open their eyes. Only then will they really be united. But how can I explain any of this to my fellow students? And what is truly sad is that some students and some famous, well-connected people are working hard to help the government, to prevent it from taking such measures. For the sake of their selfish interests and their private dealings, they are trying to cause our movement to collapse and get us out of the square before the government becomes so desperate that it takes action. If we allow the movement to collapse on its own, then the government will be able to wipe out all the leaders of the movement, as well as those leaders in the party and in the military who dare to oppose them, who represent the people. Deng Xiaoping has made it very clear that there is a small handful of people, not only in the party and in society, but also among the students. That's why I feel so sad, because I can't say all this to my fellow students. I can't tell them straight out that we must use our blood and our lives to call on the people to rise up. Of course, the students will be willing, but they are still such young children. Are you going to stay in the square yourself? No, I won't.
We need people to die in the hands of the PLA. That's what she's aiming for. And when she's asked about, are you willing to stay on the square if there is any bloodshed? And she says, no, it's not for me. So later on, She was actually rescued by Yellow Bird Operation, which was a CIA rescue plan. I mean, basically, it was about how we can take all those leaders, student leaders, into the U.S., and then they would become the front working against China in the U.S. So she was rescued by Yellow Bird project.
Just a moment, because and I want you to continue, but I just want to show people that you're not just making this up. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is in the Financial Times, Tiananmen Square, the long shadow. And if you come down here, it's a long article. There's a lot of very revealing things in it. But it says the extraction missions, which you were just talking about, aided by MI6, the UK's secret intelligence service, and the CIA, according to many accounts, had scrambler devices, infrared signalers, night vision goggles, and weapons. And I can guarantee you that the CIA and MI6 didn't just wake up one day and get involved in withdrawing these assets. That's what they were from China. They had been behind them all along since before Tiananmen Square. They were building them up. They were leading up to this moment. Please continue, Angelo.
Yeah, well, there's another point. So we'll put the video link, because I think it's extremely important, and it's exactly the same. So basically, she's the replica of Joshua Wong when it comes to Hong Kong. So they're playing on the ego. 18 years old. I mean, what does she know about life? What does she know about life? I mean, really, she's heading a movement. She might be inspiring, and the slogans are. If you hear about those slogans, there are slogans coming from the West: freedom, democracy, and so on. And what happened back then, you need to look back at 1989. You had the proportion of students. For China, students, they look up to students, because especially back then at that time, you had a very low level of education, average, just because of, historically there was a Cultural Revolution, and those were the first generations to get a university education. So people would look up to them. So then you have those students, 18 years old, calling up for freedom and so on. And then there are some points that actually tells us that this was planned. Just a single point. James Lilley is a CIA agent that was actually appointed U.S. ambassadors to Beijing 4 weeks before Tiananmen Square incident, and then it coincided with the visit of Gorbachev. So we need to challenge. You and I, we're not into conspiracy theories. We're trying to put out there all the elements, and at the end, people they can make their own, their own judgment. But those models they've been replicated. So in other countries, in other color revolution. So Gene Sharp, the one that is behind the playbook of color revolution, he was there. He was on Tiananmen Square.
He was there. Yes,
he was there. He's the one that
before too. He wasn't there as it was happening. He's like, I need to get over there and take a look at this. He was there before it happened.
And then you had Voice of America that was broadcasting 24 hours a day. I mean, what do Voice of America do? It's the propaganda arm, and they were, and so when you are there 24 hours a day, and you have lots of people listening to you, it's power. Communication is power. So what happened then after, there's a martial law, but they were expelled. I mean, China learned from that, and they knew that there was infiltration. But again, China was a fine line, when you're opening up, the funding for your economy is coming from the US. So you throwing them a bone. Okay, we are going to accept Voice of America in China and so on. So it was a fine line how we can open up and actually have some meddling. But they knew about the meddling. So and somehow they got through that. There was after 1989 there was international sanctions against China. But look at where China is now. It managed to keep preserving its national its national unity and protect its sovereignty. because again, it comes down always to sovereignty. We don't care about whoever is in power, but ultimately Chinese need to decide for their own system, and whoever is going to govern China. No, it's not a person that is living in the US, and we don't have to like their system. Chinese have to like.
I want to show people this. This is from 1989, the Washington Post. Images vilify protesters. Sometimes images vilify protesters because the protesters were acting villainous. Let's look down here. The government's case is bolstered. They're talking about the Chinese government's case, about how it wasn't a one-sided massacre like the Western media has been lying about ever since it happened. Is bolstered by the fact that in some areas, demonstrators did attack troops who did not respond, and these incidents were captured on videotape. On nightly television now, images are broadcast of protesters stoning troops, beating them with poles, and in some particularly dramatic photos, firebombing trucks. Angelo, you were just talking about that. Buses, and even armored personnel carriers. In some cases, soldiers were still inside at the time. On one avenue in western Beijing, demonstrators torched an entire military convoy of more than 100 trucks and armored vehicles. Aerial pictures of the conflagration and columns of smoke have powerfully bolstered the government's argument that the troops were victims, not executioners. Other scenes show soldiers' corpses and demonstrators stripping automatic rifles off of unresisting soldiers. So see, when we look at this, what are they saying? They're trying to say, well, yeah, that all happened, but we're still going to keep telling our lie about how that was a one-sided massacre.
No, again, it's just the violence came. They had to protect themselves at the end. The military, the PLA, but the violence started from the protesters, and if you look at how many people died, around 300 people, there's probably half of them were militaries. They were unarmed, and at most they had sticks, and they were unprepared. It's not like now you have police that are trained for this type of protest. Back then, they took the PLA was very basic army with no experience. And of course, what are you expecting? You've been thrown like petrol bombs. So there were some reactions. So it's just now the narratives has been hijacked, and thanks to WikiLeaks again. You see what WikiLeaks is doing now? They're exposing those evidence. But the question is, how come 99% of people in the West don't know about this? And this is why we make it our responsibility just to come out and say, well, those are the facts. We're not asking people to change their opinions, but just put the facts. Those are the facts. You believe for 20 years you believe that 10,000 people died on Tiananmen Square. Now you know that no one died on Tiananmen Square, and that 300 people died in reality, and half of them were military. Now people can make their own opinion. Make your own opinion. You've been lied to. How many times have you been lied to? You've been lied to when it came to the weapons of mass destruction. You've been lied to Assad gassing its own people. How many times are you going to learn that you are in a system that is lying to you? So you're a victim of your own system. So I think the West should reform their own system before trying to reform other countries' system. I mean, it's full of lie. We living in a constant lie. So I think it's only and that's the main reason we're coming out and trying to expose those lies.
And another real important point to make is that they wanted violence, and they were very confident that the Western media, no matter what happened, what actually really happened, the Western media could twist it out of context, twist it out of reality, and present it any way they wanted in front of the global public. And that's exactly what they've done ever since 1989. Even to this day, people still think, oh, some people who admire what China has become, they'll still make the concession, oh yeah, well, you know, back then maybe they did that, but that was then, and this is now, things have changed. Even they don't want to dig into it because it is such a monumental lie, and it's just so much effort to break through the propaganda, the brainwashing that has gone on. And again, we're not presenting people China's side of the story. I'm showing people the West's own words, the U.S. State Department in their cables, old Washington Post articles admitting that the mob was killing soldiers. They were killing soldiers. The soldiers didn't want the fight. It was provoked violence. And we heard one of the protest leaders admit they wanted violence. And we see this so many times ever since then, just as you said. One more. This was an article that you sent me. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about what was in here. But the thing that distracted me from actually reading this was I saw this statue and I recognized it instantly. I mean, what was I? I was like 7 years old when this happened. So I don't remember anything when it actually happened. But when I saw this is familiar to me because this is the Democracy Award from the National Endowment for Democracy. I mean, the NED and the CIA have their fingerprints all over the Tiananmen Square incident. And the Financial Times admits that the CIA was involved in smuggling human assets out of the country to Hong Kong. And so I just want people to realize just how big this lie is, how they've reinforced it by doing things like this. So this award that they give out to puppets of U.S. Foreign interference all around the globe, this is all based on this scene from Tiananmen Square in 1989. This is how they reinforce the lie.